everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lauren Severe, and in honor of the end of Outlander and the new season of Outlander coming, I think it just premiered actually, not coming, that just premiered again on Starz, I am going to be reviewing Diana Gabaldon's first novel, Outlander. Everybody, thank you so much for coming back to my channel. This is going to be probably a little bit of a longer review. There's just a little bit more to talk about because there's a lot of book this time. Diana Gabaldon does not write short novels, apparently. This thing is massive. It's just a massive tome of a book. So that is the first thing that I did want to tell you guys is that it's probably going to be a little bit of a longer video just because I feel like there's a little bit more to cover. I am excited to do this video today. This has been a book that many people have recommended to me as well as the show because I'm low-key, okay, not even low-key, I'm like hardcore obsessed with Scottish culture, Scottish history. I've been trying to convince my husband to take me to Scotland for at least the last 6 years, and we are planning to go sometime in the next year or so, and yeah, my ancestors are from Scotland. I've just always just been obsessed with the culture, especially like 16th and 17th century Highland culture. William Wallace, the Battle of Culloden, Bonnie Prince Charlie, all of that has just always been very fascinating to me, and so literally a million people who know me have all recommended Outlander. But it is such a large book that I've been intimidated and haven't read it until now. So that is why I'm finally just getting around to reviewing it, is because I finally got around to reading it. So real quick, I did listen to this book in an audiobook version. So I will say that the narrator for this book, and I think this was actually like written and published in the 90s. I don't know when the audiobook version was completed because I know audiobooks are still a relatively newer trend. They've been around for a while, but not quite as long as even like self-publishing and Kindle book versions and stuff like that. So I feel like probably this is a newer version, the audiobook. And the narrator was this one chick, and she had to do so many different accents, believably, that she deserves whatever the audiobook version of an Oscar is. I'm just saying, like, I was really impressed with the narrator. Although I do think that she sounded a little bit too prudish at times to play Claire, because Claire, naughty. Okay, she got a naughty side. Just saying. The voice was a little bit too prudish in moments when I was like, no, she is not being a prude right here, boo. Another thing is that this is a review with spoilers. So, if you have not watched Outlander, if you have not read Outlander, if you know nothing about Outlander, I may spoil something for you. You may want to click off of this review and wait until after you read it, or maybe you like spoilers, in which case, keep watching. So, the structure for my videos is I like to talk about the things that I liked, and then I go into my criticisms during the end of the video. Kind of like Mary Poppins, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. So, some things that I liked. As somebody who really does love the history and culture of the Scottish Highlands, and somebody who just really enjoys a lot of that, this book is definitely for history buffs. There are several time periods, because it is a time travel novel that we're going through. There's, different, basically she was a nurse during World War II, so she's not even from like modern day, she's still from a, past time period, and she travels through some standing stones and travels back into 17th century Scotland, before the Battle of Culloden and Bonnie Prince Charlie and all that. and finds herself stuck in a really bad situation because she is a British woman from the 1940s who is now stuck in 17th century Scotland whenever England and Scotland are pretty much at odds. So she's kind of viewed to be like, could she be a spy? You know, people don't want to trust her. She's in a very precarious situation, and of course, 17th century women didn't have a ton of options. So she's this very, like, much so independent, more modern woman who's, like, stuck in a time period that is much more restrictive towards women as well. And so that's a really cool thing to explore throughout the novel. Obviously, this is a romance. It definitely is a romance. There is a ton of sex in this book. There is a ton of sex in this book. And some of it is consensual, some of it is not, which we'll talk about. There are very graphic depictions of sex and things that are probably very triggering, like rape, graphic violence. There's just a lot of not great things. There's like child death, infant death, yeah, there's a lot of things that could trigger you in this book. So if you're somebody who doesn't like to read that content, you won't want to read it. If you're somebody who doesn't like a lot of graphic sex or bodice ripping novels, you're probably not going to want to read this book either, because there's a strong romantic subplot. It's basically the main plot is the romance, and there's some time travel on the side and some history thrown in to make the book extra long. Is basically the premise. So if you don't want to read about sex with sexy Highland men, redheaded Highland men, then you're not going to want to read this book. It's basically what it's all about. That being said, the romantic lead, James Alexander Malcolm Mackenzie Fraser, aka Jamie Fraser, is bae. He just is. He just is. He's so well developed. I mean, he's younger than her. You know, she learns different stories about him and his childhood growing up, and they have fights, and it's a slow burn, build to their romance, and then it's very sweet, and then there's layers and depth, and it's not insta-love at all. I mean, it can't be. It's like a 1,000-page book. Of course it's a slow burn. Like, what else are you gonna do, And at a certain point, she basically gets forced into a marriage with him, and so to see that too, I feel like other books that I've read that are similar to this are almost like arranged marriage stories, where it's like these two strangers end up being married and they have to figure out who the other person is throughout their marriage. It's not just a relationship. It's not something you can just leave. You're married. You're legally tied to one another. And there's certain stakes that come with that, especially against the backdrop of 17th century Scotland, that it's just, there are really compelling stakes. And to add on top of that Jamie also has this past where he's a fugitive and he's in trouble with the English a lot. He has like stuff in his past that are hang-ups and stuff that she discovers about him. It makes him a very compelling character and a very compelling love interest by default. Whereas Claire, again, seems a little bit wishy-washy and a little bit prudish, and then a little bit way not prudish and kind of vulgar at different times. And we don't necessarily get a good sense of her if we don't see her in relation to Jamie throughout some of the situations that she's put in. He really helps to ground her in certain situations where I feel like she just would be way too modern and get herself into way too much trouble. So their relationship works really well against the different conflicts of the book and really helps to make Claire a likable character, because I think Jamie is the real star piece, the star character of this piece. He's a magnet character. We're immediately, intrigued by him, and the more we learn about him, the more we want to learn about him. And Claire's relationship to him really is what I think is really special about this book. So it was smart that she made it a romance. You know, it was smart that she focused on this relationship. A lot of books that I read where I talk about there's an author who is trying to deal with a magnet character, which I have a magnet character in my book series that I'm having to deal with, and let me tell you, they're not easy. They're not easy to deal with. And some authors do really great things to incorporate those magnet characters in ways that you're utilizing how fixated the readers get on them while still keeping the story on track. And then other authors, it's like it goes off the rails and it's just a disaster because the magnet characters just wreak havoc on the story. And so I think that Diana Gabaldon really navigated the character of Jamie Fraser, who is a magnet character and the romantic lead here, really, really well. Really well. So that's something else. The dialogue was fantastic. I mean, there were just so many things, like descriptions of things that I wanted descriptions of. We got so much of that Scottish Highland culture, which is just, I covet so much of that. Like, you know, you read Highland romance novels, you know, and it's a lot about just like, oh, there's a hot guy in a kilt and then there's a lot of sex. This was not that. There was so much history and so much relationship building and so many different characters and character building and political things and, you know, familial things and legal things that come into play against the backdrop of time travel romance, you know? And so it was really, really complex and really well thought out, and the world building was really thought out. It had to be this long and to make sense. And that's a lot of what I liked about this book. But I am going to go into my criticisms, and this is a 3-star review, so there are going to be quite a few criticisms, and they may seem a little bit harsh, but there is a reason that this lost 2 stars, almost 3 whole stars. So the criticisms. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the fact that this book is too long. It's too long. There were at least 2 different instances I saw where the author could have finished this book and it would have been a complete book with a full arc, very satisfactory ending, and then could have continued from that point with the rest of the book and had at least another half of a book or whole other narrative if she wanted to expand on a few certain things. And whenever I see a book that could be 2 to 2.5 books all jammed together at once, I have to think, why did you think that all of this needed to be incorporated in one narrative? The only thing that I can think of is where she ended the book. I think that maybe she thought this would be the only one. And if this was going to be the only book and she wasn't sure if she was going to get, you know, a sequel or anything like that, then I don't know why the rest of her books are just as long. I think that maybe she's suffering from the fact that I don't know, maybe just thinks that all of these details are necessary, but it's a little bit like the Silmarillion in certain areas where it's kind of like Claire goes on these long thought train rants and she like basically does an inventory of everything that's in a room in 17th century Scotland. And don't get me wrong, while I'm a huge buff, you know, for all of that content, I was like, at certain points, like, I don't need to know everything that's in the room. I don't need to know everything in the box. I don't need to know, you know, 4-page descriptions of one certain area. Sometimes it was just overkill and it leaned too far into purple prose and seemed like filler, unnecessary content that could have been cut out completely. I mean, there were certain scenes that were so unnecessary and superfluous that I wondered why they were even included in the book at all, or if there was an editor who maybe, I don't know, like who kept this in the book and allowed the book to be like 1,000 pages long and didn't take out this totally unnecessary scene. Like, I don't understand. But moving on from that, the length of the book, the fact that it did lean a lot towards purple prose at certain times, and I did not like the fact that Claire inventoried things throughout the book because it felt unnecessary. There is a more important reason that this book lost 2 almost 3 stars. And that is the fact that Diana Gabaldon uses rape as a plot device. And I can't forgive that as a reader. I'm sorry, rape is not a plot device. Rape is not a plot device. Rape is not a plot device. Now, I will say that if a character is raped in a book, that of course, that is a major event and should be given the appropriate treatment. But there were so... I need to know how to say this correctly before I say this. So, rape and attempted rape happen so often in this book, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that a woman could have been, raped or attempted to be raped in the 17th century. I mean, this is a time period and, just where she was, the situations that she was in. It's not out of the realm of possibility that this happened. Rape happened to women for a lot of different reasons throughout history, and it's horrible every single time. But there were so many instances that she was raped, almost raped. Jamie gets raped. I mean, it was just overkill. There were so many instances of sexual violence that it became clear that it was used to further the plot forward. And at a certain point, it did not feel like it was to develop the characters or because she felt like this was something in the character's journey. It almost felt like they were happy for too long, things were okay for too long, so she just threw in a little attempted rape here and a little attempted rape here. And it disgusted me. I mean, it was just disgusting. It was disgusting use. I'm okay with sex in books. I'm okay with rape in books. I'm okay with graphic violence, with murder, with death, with whatever. I like literature that reflects life, and life is not always pretty, okay? And I like when that happens, but when it has a purpose, when it tells a story, when it's done with thoughtfulness and with care, and it doesn't feel like it's thrown in and that it's overused and it's used in a way that this just felt almost disgusting. Okay, I just couldn't get down with this. I could not. Okay, and yeah, I'm not about it. It was not great, and I'm shocked that, out of all the people who recommended this book to me, that this was never something that they talked about. I just didn't, I don't approve. I guess I'm just not in the readership for this book, because it just, I don't know. I can't even talk about it anymore. We're just going to move on to the next point, honestly. So one of the last things I want to talk about, another reason that this book lost 2, almost 3 stars, is the character of Jack Randall. Again, this is a review with spoilers, so if you don't want to know anymore, then you're going to want to click away. Because I'm going to talk about the character of Jack Randall in certain situations that he's in and certain things about him that would spoil the show and the book for you, so click away now. So Captain Jonathan Wolverton Randall, known as Black Jack Randall, is the antagonist of this story. And he looks exactly like Claire's husband from the 1940s before she goes through these standing stones. And that is a level of the effed upness of this character. But also, this character is homosexual. And he is a sadist, and he has a fixation on Jamie Fraser, and they had an interaction in the past where At one point, he flogged Jamie, which is when you, like, whip the back of somebody and it, like, tears away the skin. He flogged him so many times that the entirety of his back is nothing but one giant scar. He almost died. It killed his father seeing him being flogged. It was, like, a horrible, horrible situation. And that happened, like, before Claire ever got to Scotland, and he's been, like, fixated obsessively on Jamie ever since. And at the conclusion of the book, at a certain point, Jamie is captured by Captain Jack Randall, and he is raped violently by him in, like, the dungeon of this prison. And many times, and mutilated, and it's very graphic and very horrible. Now, Captain Jonathan Wolverton Randall was done a huge disservice as a character by the author, in my opinion. The reason, his motivation for doing the things that he's done, it's implied heavily throughout the narrative that it is because he's a homosexual man in 17th century Scotland, and during that time of oppression and shame and the fact that he probably could have been killed, for his proclivities, and the fact that he, wanted to have sex with men, that it made him violent, and it, like, made him cruel and all of this stuff, and he ends up violently raping the love interest and the magnet character in this book. And for me, that was also a disgusting theme. I don't like the idea that there's a homosexual character and that because he's homosexual in the time period that he's in, it made him the villain of this story, and concluded in such a graphic, horrible depiction, perversion of, that type of a relationship at the end of the book. It just felt wrong. The whole thing felt wrong. The author, even near the end of the book, at one point, whenever it's literally right near the end, she also implies that it's possible that, because she says, like, at one point when he's at climax or something, when they're, like, recounting the horribleness of this encounter and whatever, when they're trying to save Jamie's life afterwards, because he's mutilated and, all of this stuff and near death and whatever, and he's trying to heal from this traumatic experience, and he's, like, dying, and he's finally, like, talking to Claire, who is his wife, about everything that happened, and he said something about whenever the attack was happening, at one point, whenever Captain Jack Randall was, like, at the point of climax or something, he cried out the name Alex, who is his younger brother. So not only is Captain Jack Randall depicted to be this, like, horrible perversion of a homosexual man who is violent and cruel and whatever, he's also seen as perverted enough to also have a fixation on a brother and this, like, possible, like, incestuousness and whatever. It's just heavily implied. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that was the motivation behind his cruelty. He's a fantastic antagonist, like, don't get me wrong. She wrote him to be scary as hell. Like, I was scared of him. He was a scary as hell character. And she's obviously a very talented writer, if I can say that. I just didn't like that his motivations felt like it was because of who he was and who he couldn't help but love. And I don't like that. I just don't. It's just, there's too often in literature where, like, the antagonist is, like, oppressed, like, his sexuality is oppressed, her sexuality is oppressed, and that turns them into these cruel, horrible people. But there are so many people in the LGBTQIA community who, like, for very many years were in the closet or were very closeted or felt very fearful of who they were or who they loved. and it didn't turn them into cruel rapists. Like, you know, I just didn't like it. I didn't like it as a theme. I just couldn't get behind it. Also, I will say there was a missed opportunity with this character, because there was like an instance where Jack Randall had supposedly raped Jamie's sister, and that's like what caused the whole flogging incident or whatever, but it was like all a lie because he doesn't like girls, so he couldn't get it up or whatever, right? And there was another instance where he was like interrogating Claire and he attempted to rape her, but Jamie got there just in the nick of time to where like nothing could have happened, and you know, we don't ever see that he probably wouldn't have been able to perform then either, because he couldn't with the attempted rape of Jamie's sister Jenny during the backstory, right? So like, I don't know why this character keeps attempting to rape women when it's very clear that he can't do that. So for me, as the reader and somebody who couldn't get behind like the horrible way that this character was depicted by the end of the book, for me, what would have been even more terrifying, and let me tell you, this character scared the hell out of me still, but what would have been even more terrifying, and what probably would have been able to take away some of that like self-hating because he's a homosexual man like thing away enough to where it felt less offensive, would have been if he was just a sadist. If he just got off on hurting people. If he was a criminally violent sadist and not just a homosexual man. If he could have raped women and had sexual feelings for women as well as men, because what he liked about it was hurting them, that would have been more terrifying to me and would have felt way less offensive than saying, hey, because you're gay and you're in the 17th century, you're just going to be evil and rape people and be horrible, and it's just going to reinforce a ton of horrible things that we think, you know, is, I don't know, okay to talk about in literature for some reason or another. Anyway, I felt like his character was just done a real disservice in the book. I can't really tell you about the show or anything. I would say, like, go watch it and I guess have a bit of more of an opinion for yourself, because, I don't know. But as far as the book, I don't think I'm going to be continuing with the series because I didn't particularly enjoy this a ton. And as I have been told, they don't really stay in Scotland for very much longer. It's kind of like they go to different places or whatever. And that was kind of the whole reason behind me reading this book. And probably the only reason that this got 3 stars was because of like the history stuff and the Highland culture stuff. And if there's not a ton of that in the other books, like I don't see myself really even getting through them. And I think probably the only reason that I got through this, to be honest, is because I listened to it in the audiobook form. Even in the audiobook form, I wanted to quit listening to it a couple of times. So it's not a glowing review from me, but what I have been told is that this show is a lot better, and I hope you enjoyed the review. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Sure, I'm going to get a lot of hate, but I don't censor any of my comments. It's not, you know, the best, I guess, review of the book, but Diana Gabaldon is obviously a force of nature. She is still writing these books and has this show going, and man, there's a lot of really steamy sex scenes, so if you are down for that, this is for you. Anyway, it'd be really cool if you liked and subscribed. Let me know what you think about the review, and it's been a pleasure. Happy reading!